Hey everyone. I'm actually super excited to be here in person. The last Meridian that I attended in person was in 2019. So last year I was busy having a baby, so I couldn't join. But yeah, so it's really awesome to see a lot of familiar faces, but also new faces here. And the thing I wanted to talk about today is regarding the Wallet SDK. So I think overall, we're talking a lot about innovation that we're doing on the smart contracts front, right? So Soroban is a big topic here, but I wanted to also shed some light on, what we've been doing on the other fronts, like in terms of support to our interoperable ecosystem, which has always been one of the key core pillars of Stellar. And we have a lot of exciting news on that front. I know that Jake is also here, and he will talk about the Anchor platform, which is also something that we've been working for a while. So I'm talking about the counterpart of that, which is the Wallet SDK. So I'm Alex Cordeiro. I am a Senior Director of Engineering at the SDF. So as I mentioned, interoperability has always been an important pillar for us. And we've defined standards for wallets and anchors, for instance, to interoperate very, very early on in the existence of our ecosystem or even like of Stellar, right? And what is super interesting, so why is this something that actually matters? And I think I drew something like super simple here, probably too trivial for me to spend a lot of time talking about, but I think please, entertain me for a second. So the idea, is if I'm talking about the Wallet SDK, what is, thinking from a wallet perspective, one of the benefits of using something like Stellar is, as a wallet, if you want to integrate with an on and off ramp, say you're using MoneyGram or any other anchor in order to enable your users to on and off ramp assets, I guess, you ideally don't want to spend a lot of time to expand your reach to other anchors or on and off ramps in the ecosystem. So if all the anchors that exist on the Stellar network actually implement the same similar standard APIs to provide that service, that means the effort of integrating with a single ramp or the effort of integrating with many of them in that very ideal world would mean a simple matter of configuration, not writing specific code for each of the anchors. So this is the power of creating this interoperability standard, is you code once, and ideally with very little modifications, you can actually support multiple companies, and you can provide a very competitive service in terms of your wallet offering. However, standards are kind of a tricky thing for you to define, right? Especially with the point that I just brought, that we actually define those standards very early on. The reality is we created some basic standards that are widely used, like SEP24, SEP6, very early on with very little information or very little variance on use cases that people would build this for, right? So, which is my first point there. If you want to create an interoperable ecosystem, sometimes you have to prematurely define a standard so that you maximize adoption. You can have multiple people from day zero actually adopting this standard. And then very early on in the existence of an ecosystem, people can leverage those standards. But then, because you define them prematurely, the consequence is you learn as more people are building that there are some edge cases, there are some small little tweaks that people require in order to provide their service that they actually cannot actually offer because of the limitations of the standard. So then the next step is you actually evolve your standard, right? And the tricky thing is you define those prematurely. You have a small ecosystem that is already making use of that, but then you need to create these improvements in order to accommodate more use cases, and then you have to have other people adopt. And in that process, you don't want to break everyone who's already compatible. So you need to create this backwards compatible evolution system. And because of that, you know, if anyone here is familiar with SEP 6, for instance, or SEP 24, they actually, the thing ends up becoming this almost like patchwork where you have you either grow by having a fixed set of endpoints with a lot of optional parameters, if you're thinking about like anchor standards, for instance, or alternatively, you have a bunch of endpoints that do slightly different things. But anyways, it very rarely, I would say it's probably impossible for you to get as close to a good API as if you had defined that from the get-go, considering all the use cases and accommodating all of them. Also, besides the premature definition and improvements that need to be backwards compatible, you also need to communicate about those changes. And we strive to do the best communication we can about every modification that we do to each of the SEPs. But the truth is, this is an open ecosystem. There's a lot of people that we actually know how to reach, and we use different channels. We use Discord, we have the Stellar Protocol repository, we have mailing lists, but still, we cannot reach everyone. So at that point, it's a challenge to make sure that you have a fully compatible, interoperable ecosystem if you don't know how to tell people in advance that they actually need to accommodate new use cases, new endpoints, and whatnot changes in a SAP. And also, well, all those three things together kind of incentivize people who actually want to create this slight modification variation to really, instead of going through the whole process of feeding back into the SEPs, or the standards, the Stellar ecosystem proposals, as we call them, this slight change that they want to make, they simply work out between the anchor and the wallets that they actually are integrated with and say like, hey, by the way, can you just tweak this parameter or add this new thing, which makes them by definition non-conformant to the standard, and then we cause breakage into the ecosystem, which is also super hard. So our recommendation, for someone to, before the product that I'm talking about, a recommendation for anyone who's implementing a wallet, for instance, to become interoperable, integrate with a MoneyGram access, for instance, right? You actually, the way you go about it is you read the SAP, and the SAP is like this super long document, bunch of details, bunch of edge cases. It's in text form, right? So you parse the whole freaking document. At the end of it, you have an understanding of how things need to work. You write some code. Then you look back, realize that there were a bunch of edge cases that you didn't capture, and other rinse, repeat. It's a lot of work, right? And not very scalable. So you'd end up with many different interpretations, implementations of the standard that were actually aiming at being compliant, but they're not fully because it didn't capture some nuance that's written in textual form again. So I'm going to give an example of the reality of people before a Wallet SDK, right? So say you want to start this interactive deposit flow with an anchor using TypeScript, a very common language, and this is not vanilla TypeScript, right? This is using the Horizon Client SDK. So think about there's already a level of abstraction in terms of like how you communicate with Stellar. This is just using the the tool that you had available in order to start a deposit flow. And you see here, from your development team spent, let's say, hours, probably days, reading the SEP, trying to make sense of it. Then they start writing this code. So they want to implement SEP 24, but then step 24 actually depends on SEP 10, which is authentication. It also depends on SEP 1, which is a Stellar information specification. So at the end of the day, they spend hours reading this text, and then they produce this code that hopefully is actually accurate. So in that process, they wrote 16 lines of code for SEP 1, then 57 plus 8 plus 38 for SEP 10, and then 34, 75. You get the gist of it. 281 lines of code after you spent all that time reading the SEPs. Do you know if you're right? Maybe we have some tools to kind of validate some use cases or edge cases, but it's not perfect. So my point being, it's a lot of work. And at some point, after seeing people in the ecosystem doing this over and over and over, we thought to ourselves, why not provide an SDK, right? So standardize not only the specification of something, but really write the code that is compliant, capture all these edge cases, so that people don't have to reinvent the wheel. What are the benefits of that, right? Or pillars, if you will. And by the way, one thing I wanted to call out, I say client side here, but really think about this doesn't need to live on the front-end code. It's a client side of a, thinking about a wallet connecting to an anchor. Client side is the wallet part, but sometimes the code lives in backend. It doesn't necessarily need to live on the front-end code. But having a standard implementation, this library that you get to use, it becomes so much easier to not only become, but actually remain interoperable. And what I mean by that is becoming is a matter of just using the tools, the functions that are there that actually implement all the new ones of the SAPs, but also remaining interoperable because as we evolve the standards, we create new versions of the library, and upgrading libraries is part of a life cycle of any application that anyone builds. It's just bread and butter for anyone who's building a wallet, right? Like they have client applications for a bunch of stuff, analytics, you name it, authentication, right? So this is one of them. You just make sure that you're upgrading. If at any point you realize that there's a breaking change, we use Semver, so at that point you would know that you have to kind of make some bigger changes in your code in order to be able to use the library. It's also faster, and I'm gonna show like the difference in like how much faster, but it's a lower cost integration, and lots of wallets are well established. They're integrating Stellar into their platform, but really some are startups that don't have a lot of money, that don't have a lot of time to actually spend reading SEPs. So this allows them to not think a lot about the SEPs, just import the library, use the functions, and then you're automatically able to connect to our very wide variety of anchors on the network. And because they're not spending time reading the SEPs, they can focus on use cases. They can really focus on what makes their wallet different from any other wallet in the world, and cater to those users, focusing on the user experience more than anything, as opposed to how do I use Stellar. This is an example that I have here. Same example that I had before, where you had to write 281 lines of code besides reading the SEP. So remove the read the SEP process here, import the wallet, write this 10 lines of code, and you can do exactly the same thing that you did in the past. So that's a pretty significant difference. And I'm excited about this because I feel like this is going to save people's times. And you can see here, I used the TypeScript SDK for this one, just for the sake of, I didn't want to compare like TypeScript with Python or something, because that wouldn't be fair. But also, I think the other thing you can see here is there's still some references to SEPs here, which is not the most ergonomic way of going about this. We actually implemented something cool on the Kotlin SDK, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute. So in terms of coverage and roadmap, we currently have 2 wallets that the SDF itself is building, or two SDKs that the SDF is building. We have a Kotlin one and we have a TypeScript one. And this is basically what we support in each of those. So Stellar Auth is supported by both. Account recovery, this is especially useful for non-custodial wallets that want to provide a way for people to recover their keys in case they deleted their application, they lost their phones, or whatever. For whatever reason, the key is not only stored locally, but they can actually lever the SEP30 standard for actually allowing people to recover their accounts. Also, reserves and transaction fee sponsorship, which is especially, again, useful for non-custodial wallets so that the user doesn't have to pay for the fees. A lot of wallets actually leverage that to provide a better experience to their users. Interactive on and off ramping. You can see that some of these have a clock emoji. That means it's not supported yet. We're working on that. So you can see that Kotlin has a more comprehensive implementation, but TypeScript is catching up fast. I mentioned here developer-friendly type aliases, right? And that one is what I was talking about when I mentioned SEP10 or SEP24 also being names of functions within the library, but really, or the SDK, but really the goal is to abstract away the fact that SEPs exist at all and use more user-friendly names like interactive deposit, interactive withdrawal, authenticate, read information, very high-level things that you can think about and reason about without having a lot of in-depth knowledge about interoperability standards on Seller. Coming up next, SEP6 is a big one. We focused on SEP24 because there was more momentum and we had like design partners that were actually interested in SEP24 first, but SEP6 is coming up next. And the other big thing is Sorbonne support. And for that one, I don't have a story yet, if I'm honest, right? I think there's a lot of discovery to happen in the ecosystem to see like how people are going to use Sorbonne and how that's going to play out with a anchor network, and if people are going to use like Stellar asset contracts, and there's a lot of open questions there. But as soon as we have a clearer picture, we plan to incorporate that into the Wallet SDK. And that is everything I had. I think most importantly, if there's one action item here, please, we need people's feedback on this, right? We've been working on it for a while. We don't know what the gaps are. We have this roadmap. It's not set in stone. More importantly, we want to create something that is actually useful to everyone. So please keep us honest and give us feedback, raise issues, and we'll be happy to build on top of what we have right now. So I actually think we might have time for a few questions because we have 2 minutes. So thank you. Do we have any questions?
I have one. If
All right,
no one
go for it.
closing, yeah, I'm very curious because being one of the developers in the ecosystem, you guys build a lot of tools that really help us guys, and I'm thankful for that because I suffered with SEPs for a long time.
Yeah.
But why now?
Yeah, that's a great question. So this is not our first attempt at this, if I'm honest. But when we were building Vibrant in the past, we wanted one of the core ideas there was actually to build this very thick Wallet SDK and have like a very small code base that was focused on the Vibrant use cases. But I think it became over specialized on Vibrant to the point that it wasn't exactly what we were aiming for. And I think in the meantime, the ecosystem matured a lot and a lot of the standards evolved. So I feel like we're in a place right now that we can actually build something with confidence that is going to be like more standardized, more stable moving forward.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
We have time for one more. Does anyone else want to bring a question? No? So, round of applause for him.
Thanks so much.
Guys.